Point to a couple of the cutting edges of this field, and you all have already pointed out some of the areas where growth and development may be needed. I want to point out a few more, and maybe you'll have something to say about that. Secondly, to review with you this timeline that I passed out, because it will highlight some of the key developments that we haven't talked about yet that are important in understanding the trajectory. And then third, to look at this mysterious people, biodiversity loss nexus, and think about how some of these ideas of religion and ecology analysis might contribute to it. Pretty ambitious. Let's see how we do. So as far as cutting edges in religion and ecology and where it needs to develop, a few things that we've sort of touched on, but specificity of place is one area that studies are developing. And you can see that in the Karmapa's essay about religion and ecology on the Tibetan Plateau, where he points out that climate change has a particular salience to people on the Tibetan Plateau. The Tibetan Plateau is warming much faster than the rest of the world, and then there's a particular religious tradition, more or less indigenous to that place, and so how do those work together? Some of the earlier work tended to be much broader and less specific, so place has become a focus. And relatedly, practice, which we've talked about a fair bit already. But practice and embodiment and a much stronger sense of how people live in their bodies, how those bodies live in religion, how those bodies are emplaced in even everyday religion or lived religion, so not the official dogmatic tradition that happens in the house of worship or that comes down from the authority figure, but how people experience that in their daily lives as a practice, whether it's sitting out bowls of water in the Buddhist tradition, or maybe saying a prayer, or drawing rangoli, which are beautiful artworks of colored sand on the sidewalk in South Asia. They're all spiritual practices, and religion and ecology has been looking much more at how those are experienced in daily life. And then the third one that also the Karmapas so hard to spell at the board. Again, that Karmapa's piece touches on is what the role of contemplative practice is, or and I think some of you have touched on it already, that also the internal experience of religion and its relation to ecology. And so then Robert mentioned that I should tell you about an initiative that he and I were involved along with Jake Sherman and Sean Kelly, that looked at the role of contemplation as related to ecology and social justice. What was the official name of the group?
Well, the big group, of which we were a subset, big group was the Project for Mentoring. So senior people, 8 senior people, then mentored 16 mid-career people on how to get spirituality into their institutions. Then we broke off and enlarged ourselves into a group for ecology, spirituality, and social justice.
That's right. Ecology. And the way that spirituality was understood in that group had a lot to do with what one of our members calls contemplative environmentalism. He and others have been looking at the role of contemplative practice, like meditation or prayer in both rejuvenating environmentalists and in perhaps providing access to insights that are not ordinarily available. And so that was a very rich group, and actually really contributed so much to the founding of ESR. That group met for 4 years. Scholars from all over, from universities all over the US, about a dozen of us meeting in beautiful inspirational places like Allison and the Upaya Zen Center, and to share our current research as well as contemplative practices, and to engage in dialogue with each other about the connections between ecology, spirituality, and social justice. And out of that came a lot of insight into how to do ESR. So that was a great supportive group. So these are some of the cutting edges of the religion and ecology field. I guess another one that I didn't have there in my paper is queer theory and general sort of critical theory. As Robert mentioned earlier, some of the founding volumes in this field were not particularly feminist or didn't particularly take a political point of view, but subsequent scholars have questioned and critiqued that approach and called for a more critical point of view, and that's certainly been developing in the field in the last decade. So then, developing in the field. Yes, Robert?
Elizabeth, in addition to place, practice, and prayer, I'm wondering, are these your three?
Yes.
I'm wondering, would you consider community?
No, I'm opposed to it. I'm totally kidding. What do you mean?
I mean that the way, place, practice, and prayer are ways that we cohere among ourselves and with nature. Mm-hmm. And I would think that every kind of community would have some of the same powers to ground us and make us attentive, make us grateful, a little bit like place. So for example, when we went to a Lama and then Upaya and then Esalen, the places were important, but so were all of we, in a way that, you know, in this program, the people who made the first film were people who met together. Mm-hmm. And then the three people who made the next film met together. And we in PCC are friends who are collaborating together and awakening each other. Mm-hmm. So I think that I wish you were there.
Well, so that goes back to the Sangha, right? But so I'm saying these are places that the field needs to develop. These are studies that have come out more recently, have attended more to these critiques of the previous studies, have raised these issues and said we need to attend more to these. I'm not sure what I can say about community, you know, whether people have said we need to attend to this more, but you're saying we do.
Well, I think that if we're going to solve the ecological problem, we need people to be healthy. Yep. And the most healthy making influence that I can imagine is community. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why back to these three. Yeah.
Yeah. And if I could just add to place, mm-hmm. There's a man who taught here when I first came. His name was Swan. He had a beautiful book called Sacred Places. Mm. But I've not seen reference to it since. Mm. But there was no interest in him or his work then.
The
None.
time wasn't right. Yeah.
None.
I know a few books on sacred places, but I don't know that one.
Yeah, I've never seen it again.
Uh-huh.
But one of the reasons I mention it is because in addition to place, there's also timing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then, yeah, as I said, I mean, so these are sort of, I think these are meta issues for the field and related to karma also.
Yeah, right.
So I was talking particularly about the scholarly discourse here, but these are larger issues that the field needs to take into account. And the time clearly was not right 20 years ago, and now it is. And that's interesting as well. Did you have a point?
I'm just wondering how sexuality and gender ties in with ecology. It just seems a bit far from here. I mean, is this more of an archetypal of this mother kind of thing, or is it like the people who are studying it, whether they're male or female?
Lily, would you like to respond at all? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I know you've been thinking about this.
I think that it ties into the question of, can we have any kind of theory or method that is relevant that is not based in history? I think gender, sexuality are really important aspects of how we experience the world. And that's kind of what ecology is, and that's also kind of what religion is. It's like formulations of how we experience the world and how we move in the world and communities. So I think that gender, queer theory, meaning not just male or female, and sexuality, sexual practices, rituals around sex. I mean, it's a big part of how we are in the world, and I think it's definitely important to bring that in. And I think it's something that sounds kind of like it's off, but because it's not something that we talk about yet normally, but it's really important.
Great, thank you. Religions have a lot to say about gender, much of it negative in my reading, but so a lot to say about prioritizing men over women and describing what roles are appropriate for women and what roles are appropriate for men, and towards a more liberatory society that takes into account the well-being of nature as well as the well-being of humans. We have to look at those gender messages in religious texts and practices too. Who can be a priest? Who can give communion? Who can lead worship? And that's, I think, one of the big reasons for the distaste for organized religion in contemporary US is that a lot of women have found it to be really misogynist and really exclusionary and just don't want any part of it. And men may have had those same complaints. It's also, mainstream religions have had a lot of negative things to say about gay people and their relationships. And so, again, as we're moving towards a more libertarian, inclusive society, we need to include these in our questioning, in our reevaluation and reinterpretation. And then relatedly, Christianity for sure, and probably other religions, have often sort of conflated women and nature together, and then use that conflation to justify domination of both. So because of that historic conflation, as we're working on liberating nature, we have to work on women, liberating women, or vice versa. And I would say that then extends to the range of gender and sexual identities that, for the most part, weren't even taken up in these religious texts. So it's definitely an area of development and exploration that has not been completely done whatsoever.
Well, it just came out in the news. The Pope is open to more gay. So the Catholic Church is.
Yeah. Yeah. So just now.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. A
Just
huge.
now as in today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just happened.
Or yesterday. I thought. Yeah.
Yesterday or today.
Yeah.
He said something about it.
Yeah, I have a friend who works on queer theory and religion and ecology and posts about it on Facebook.
Plus
Yeah.
the Supreme Court with
Right.
gay marriage in about 5
Exactly.
states is happening.
Exactly.
Over.
And so then we could also ask, how are these changes in marriage and relationship practices, what sort of ecological effects do they have? That's an interesting question as well. And what sort of engagement with religion or not? I mean, if there's more legal gay marriages, does that mean there's going to be a greater involvement of religion, or does that mean they're all going to be secular marriages? And there's lots of questions there. Lily, and then
I think it really does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it really ties into the subject of diversity,
Mm-hmm.
which you could say, social diversity could be parallel or analogous to biodiversity,
Absolutely.
and the health of an ecological community or a social community or both actually entwined, which is where we're trying to really go with ESR.
Exactly. I think of socio-ecological justice.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, thank you.
I guess I just was wondering if you, because I hear this, I mean, integral ecology too, where you talk about the ecofeminism. If you have any like specific examples of how it's being applied, because I see a lot of correlation or a lot of lines to be drawn between the two.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, like the justice aspect of that, of just in general society, is a lot more applicable. Like probably McKibben is going to talk about that tonight.
Mm.
The effect of the changing planet and ecology on just like the underserved of the world. But I guess I'm wondering how, if you have like what the specific work is that's being done applying feminist studies to ecology.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, I guess I hear a lot of parallels or people calling upon us to study it in that certain way, and I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm just wondering how people are doing that.
Mm-hmm. Well, so a classic work, and this will take you actually to your history, key moments in religion and ecology timeline
Okay.
here. A classic work is The Death of Nature from 1980, Carolyn Merchant's book, that very clearly delineates these historical conflations of women and nature, and how that was how that allowed domination. In a much more practical and contemporary situation, if you look at subsistence-based livelihoods, for example, where people have to fetch water because they don't have tapped water in their house, women fetch the water. And women can spend the entire day fetching the water and coming back, which means they can't go to school, they can't do other kinds of work, they maybe don't have time to take care of the children. So changing ecological conditions have a major and perhaps disproportionate influence on the lives of third world women.
Yeah.
So then we can look at, well, what is their religion teaching? And this goes back to the question of what's your theory of change? Do we need to change ideas? Do we need to change the system? We need to change both, right? So we need to have some way to provide that village with water. But maybe the religion is teaching that, you know, women's work is not important, or women should not go to school, and so it doesn't matter if they're fetching water all day.
Yeah.
So if you then look at what the religious teachings are and whether they're reinforcing and supporting that allocation of women's labor, then you could approach the issue on two fronts. You could approach it both from the ideological realm as well as from the material realm, trying to change the conditions for those women.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it, like that, like the water example seems to be more of like a religious problem, even if it's because or a cultural problem than an ecological one necessarily. But
well, if there's no water because it's been drained away for corporate interests, or because it's been dammed upstream, or because we're in the biggest drought in recorded history, that's.
But the women going to fetch the water isn't, that's not.
Changing is uninterpreted.
What's that?
Changing is uninterpreted.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so you can take any focus or any lens, but I would say that they all converge on these kinds of examples. Yeah.
Well, I would say, to me, it goes to the wider patriarchal scientific paradigm that's, you know, destroying the earth, you know. That the woman, you know, it's a patriarchal, the women have to do this, and then they do the, you know, that's what they do all day, and then they have kids. It's patriarchal. So it's it's connected to that. And I think we need to shift that paradigm to, you know, where there's more equality between men, women, gays, and everybody. So that's where I would, and it's
right.
ecological.
I agree with you on like a large, on
and it's ecological.
level, yeah.
It's and it's ecological in that, you know, look what's happening to the earth.
Well, I just sort of just kind of reflect on the social justice part of, you know, what Lily said, David said, and Brian said. It's all tied in one thing, you know, the patriarch society, and it's sort of this narrow-mindedness is excluding any of the shadow side or anything, you know, in advance of its own time, and in terms of sexuality and genders and gay people. I think they're like for, you know, for Christianity, especially in the U.S., there are some actually counseling groups, professional psychology who has the Christianity beliefs and trying to have this converting therapy, trying to convert gay people to straight, but they never. But what's so funny is they never try to convert straight people to gay people.
But that's the fear with adoption, for example, by gay couples, they're always worried that the kids will be converted to being gay. There's no evidence at all that could be. Actually, let me tell you one really fascinating piece of data that I read once. They studied the rates of, I think, abuse and neglect of children among different kinds of families, like with a man and a woman as parents, with two men as parents, and with two women as parents. And because, you know, the extreme right is always telling us, oh, it's the downfall of the family if we let gay people get married, right? So guess which kind of family had the lowest rate of child abuse and neglect?
Gay parents.
It was women, yeah. So I said, okay, so we should all be lesbians now, right? So we can like raise our kids properly. So anyway, yeah, so there are a lot of oppressive structures that we need to dismantle, and they're really all
right, I mean,
entangled.
I see that connection, the
Yeah.
patriarchal society and the way that's influenced our economics and the way we just like view and treat the world and our resources. Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. I guess
And
I was
women have been treated as resources in the key
Right.
connection.
yeah.
So then the liberation of nature and the liberation of women, and really the liberation of all people and all beings that are
Yeah.
connected.
Great, yeah, thanks. I guess I was just trying to get some more like on
Yeah.
the ground specifics.
Yeah, yeah. I've been trying to think of a concrete study that I could refer you to, and I'm not coming up with one, which maybe means that there needs to be more research
Yeah.
done.
I think we should have an intro to feminism in PCC course that is actually required.
Probably a good idea.
Prerequisite.
Yeah.
Because in general, in undergraduate degrees, feminism is not required, and
Yeah.
it is such an important aspect, not only for women to learn about their own liberation in a patriarchal society, but also for men and for people who are not within the gender binary to learn about how they can be liberated from the patriarchal constructs that they're embedded in. And I think if we're going to be talking about theory and method and looking at ecology and religion, we're really going to want to look at our assumptions and where we're coming from. And that is patriarchy. And so feminism is the answer to that. And so I really think it should be a basic introductory level requirement.
The chair's right behind you, so. Yeah, it sounds good to me. And I like what you said about the liberation of men too. I'm very, this is a little bit of a sidetrack, but I'm very aware right now of how male parents of young children are sort of understood in society, because that's what my partner is. And he's a super duper involved parent, and he feels like he gets no recognition, he gets no really time to do what he wants to do, no appreciation. And so in order to allow male parents to do their part, they need social support in the same way that female parents do. So, yeah. Yes. Excellent points. Okay, so let's just look at a couple things, because I really feel like we're actually on the verge of this case study that I want to talk about. I think we've pointed to it in so many different ways. But I want to make sure that you have some key points from this brief history of religion and ecology that I've given you. And I think one of the points I want to note is is Thomas Berry's book. I think you're probably all familiar with Thomas Berry, and he's certainly a major influence on PCC and many of the faculty here. So his book, The Dream of the Earth, came out in 1988, so it's quite a ways back. But then it was really another decade, the late 90s, when Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm organized a series of 10 conferences at the Harvard Center for the Study of World Religions. And these 10 conferences were a religious tradition plus ecology. So you had Christianity and ecology, Judaism and ecology, Hinduism and ecology, Buddhism and ecology, Jainism and ecology, and Shinto and ecology, and so on. And these conferences allowed and encouraged scholars who had something to say about that relationship to come together. And it was really the first time that there had been, other than, 1990, the Spirit and Nature Conference at Middlebury College, but it was the largest event so far that had looked at the specific religious traditions plus ecology. And that series of 10 conferences then resulted in 10 books that are great references on this field. So if you're interested in Buddhism, you can find Buddhism and Ecology or Hinduism and Ecology. And I should special props to Buddhism and Ecology, because it was reading that book in the late 90s that pushed me back to graduate school, because it was finally time. And it was clear that people were doing this, and that I would have people to engage with, as there hadn't been before.
You might mention shamanism as well.
Is that
John Grimm did the shamanism volume.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, I forget about that one. Yeah. And shamanism and ecology. I didn't list all of them. Can you point out any that I missed?
No, I thought, but even if you didn't, it's just that shamanism should be added, because
Yeah.
it could have been it could have been omitted, and it wasn't.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and clearly has a great deal to say about the human nature connection. Thank you. So, and then just the year prior, 1995, the Alliance for Religions and Conservation was founded in the UK. And this is a global organization that works with different faith traditions to help them live out their particular ethics and faith in an environmentally responsible way. So it doesn't try to just critique and say your texts are all wrong. It says, okay, what can you retrieve and find in your text, and how can we help you express that more in your daily life? So they work with people and traditions all over the world, really on conservation, the conservation of biodiversity and wild landscapes. And then in 97, there's a journal, and so now there are 2 journals. 97, Worldviews, Global Religions, Culture, and Ecology came online, and then in 2006, the Journal for the Study of Religion, Nature, and Culture started. So now this field has 2 scholarly journals. And then in 2008, the Society for Conservation Biology, which is one of the leading environmental conservation scholarly groups, established a religion and conservation biology working group. So the science side, or the environmental side, is also recognizing that they need to engage with nature. I would say, though, the recognition has been a little bit slower from that side, and that's the side that I come from, because they're very suspicious of all this, like, ooh, religion, what is that? But there is growing acknowledgement, and I just corresponded with a conservation biologist over at UC Berkeley who wanted to know more, and I sent him a bunch of resources. And so it's a growing area, mostly because of the sort of instrumental use of religions. Where are the people? They're in religions. That's how we can reach them. So, and then CIS establishes Ecology, Spirituality in 2012.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So those are some brief
Last name and last
notes
film.
over the last 40-something years. Okay, so let me suggest to you, this is really a dialogue and not fully established, but I've been totally fascinated by this Ebola crisis, and the way it's just this sort of slow-moving disaster that's unfolding over the world. But I think that it is a tragedy in the literary sense of the word. I think it's this, and I have to give credit where credit's due. Some of my thinking on this is follows on the writing of Benjamin Hale, who's a philosopher and environmental studies professor at UC Boulder, who wrote a really excellent piece in Slate about why Ebola is a challenge to our humanity. And so I'll talk a little bit about what he said. But it got me thinking even more about this. So I think, where is it?
Elizabeth, I missed his name. Could you say it again?
Benjamin Hale, H-A-L-E.
Wow.
Here it is. Yeah. So I think it's a tragedy in the sense that it plays on some of our tragic flaws, and that's what we were just kind of getting to. Our tendencies towards domination, towards excluding the other, our inability to pay attention often, our self-protectiveness, our fear of the unknown, fear of the other.
Inability to pay attention, could you say?
Yes, I
more
will,
about
yeah,
that?
and I will say more about all of these, but, so let me talk about that one. So, those of you who have been following the news since the summer know that Ebola broke out in, I think it was Sierra Leone, I don't remember where it started first, during the summer, during July. And public health officials were warning at that time, this is a big deal, we need more help, we need materials, we need more doctors, and it was apparently ignored by the international community until maybe September. So that's what I mean, but not even just that. Okay, and so then connecting to ecological crises. The reservoir host of the Ebola virus, which by the way is hardly alive. It can't live outside a host. And they say that viruses are on the boundary between being alive and not alive. It's not really clear. The reservoir host is the fruit bat. And the fruit bat lives in tropical jungle. And historically, West Africa has been covered by tropical jungle. Now, in the last few decades, mining has been huge business in Sierra Leone. So mining means building roads, and then obviously destroying large areas of habitat. At this point, Sierra Leone is on, if it keeps destroying habitat at this present rate, it's on target to cut down all its forests by 2018. And so this is what I mean, part of what I mean about paying attention also. Now, so the fruit bat lives in tropical forests. When you fragment forests by building a road through them, there's more edges and there's more places for people and wildlife to come into contact with each other. And as the forests have been more and more destroyed, and as people have pushed more and more into the remote areas for these mining projects, there are more occasions for humans and fruit bats to come into contact. So public health people aren't really sure how this current outbreak started. But one hypothesis is that a child ate some fruit that was contaminated, that a fruit bat had also bitten and somehow left their saliva in there, and the child ate the contaminated fruit and got Ebola. But so it looks like karma. We know, and by we I mean pretty much everyone who pays attention to environmental issues in the whole world knows that it's not a good idea to cut down all the tropical forests. We know that we need habitat for non-human species because our lives depend on them in a myriad of ways. We know that we need to preserve wild habitat, not only for other species, but for what's called ecosystem services, for clean water, clean air, soil stability, and just a myriad of other services that intact ecosystems provide. And economists have tried to quantify the amount of value that we gain from ecosystem services, and it far exceeds the gross domestic product of the whole world, and because we are 100% dependent on the ecosystems for our lives. Even if we feel completely removed, like here in this building in the middle of the city, we're getting water from Hetch Hetchy, we're having trees filter our air, we eat.
Bees die, we can't
Bees die, we can't pollinate our plants, we eat meat, some of us, or we eat plants, others of us. I mean, there's no way in which we are not dependent on intact ecosystems. And yet, we are destroying them at this shocking rate. And I think what's so interesting and tragic about Sierra Leone is that much of the deforestation is for mining, for gold and diamonds and bauxite and a kind of titanium called rhodolite, I think. So these are things that well, some of them we need, but gold and diamonds, how much is it a need, how much is it a want? So resources are being extracted from this developing country for probably the developed world. And there's a big problem with smuggling and with weak laws so that the government is not getting the full royalties and taxes that they could on these resources. So it looks to me, and so, so there were two things that really came to my attention. The other thing is the Living Planet report from World Wildlife Fund came out this past week. Did anyone see it? Horrifying. And they actually say in the preface to the Living Planet report, this is not for the faint of heart. That's what the executive director says in his preface letter. Because, and I need to get the exact numbers. Because here we go. Because in the period from 1970 until 2010, so they publish this Living Planet Index every year, every few years, and they monitor representative populations of vertebrates, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish. They can't monitor every population around the world, but they have representative populations of these vertebrates that they monitor. And in the period from 1970 to 2010, they found out that the average decline across all these groups was 52%. We've lost half of our living biological diversity of vertebrates in the last 40 years. So that's, I know, you're totally depressed.
Sorry, because I heard that too. Is that half of each population that was, or
No.
half of the actual
Average.
species?
So they monitor representative populations,
Yeah.
and on the average, 52% is gone. So it's different for different populations, and I'm going to
Okay.
break that out a little bit, and then it's broken out a lot more in the report. So it might be like lions and bears and cheetahs, and each of those would have a variance,
Okay.
which I don't have here.
Do you
But-
know how many species became extinct in that time?
I don't know. It's very hard to estimate because there are a lot of insect species that aren't even identified.
I guess I meant vertebrates.
Oh, vertebrates, yeah. I don't know. But again, to break out the half a little bit more, they found out that the terrestrial vertebrates had decreased by 39%, and as had the marine vertebrates. And then, but the freshwater vertebrates had decreased by 76%. So that's amphibians and fish. And then I just read it, at the same time I was looking at all this, I read a piece about how many pharmaceuticals are getting into the the water courses and having effects on freshwater species. So it's really disturbing. And so then here's the question, what is our theory of change? Can we just like change the institutions right now? Can we change ideas about how we go about things? Can we change what we value? But it seems to me that the Ebola crisis is really, or could be, a wake-up call about this. If we cut down tropical forests, then we encounter reservoir species that contain horrific diseases, and they spread in creating a humanitarian crisis and potentially an economic crisis. Now what people are worried about in West Africa is the total destabilization of the region, because the mining has completely slowed down. There's a great article in Bloomberg about how like all the what do you call them, stock prices of the mine companies are down and how terrible this is. I mean, but if that wakes people up to that you can't have mines unless you actually can maintain some biodiversity somehow around them, that may be significant. Okay, so yes, question or comment?
I guess kind of touching back on the two different approaches with the ideas or materialism, do you think that the one with the idea route kind of takes a little more time that we may not have potentially?
Yes and no, because I mean, my sort of gut feeling is that it takes a long time, but I think the example of the change in the acceptance of gay marriage over the last 20 years is a great counterexample, and that is one of the fastest social changes that I've ever seen. How about you?
Absolutely, it's incredible.
Unbelievably. I mean, when I was in your chair, like, gay, ew, men can't get married. I mean, like, that was normal discourse, you know? And now it's like, of course, you know, like, all my gay friends are married. But through the Midwest, not just the coasts, you know? So I think that people who care about the earth need to look at that movement and see what they did. And there are that movement had certain advantages that may be particular to that movement. But I think there are also sort of strategies to think about what causes that kind of fast social change.
The only one that went faster was anti-smoking.
Yeah,
It's an amazing change.
yeah.
It's like 5 years.
Like 5 or 10 years, yeah.
Yeah.
Right here in San Francisco, yeah.
Well, I mean, it fits into Rick Tarnas's idea of currently we're in a Uranus-Pluto square, and in the 60s, when gay rights and a lot of the liberation movements really got started, there's a Uranus-Pluto conjunction. So now at the square, it's just, so it fits right in with that.
Yeah. So we should take advantage of it in the
So,
same way
I
that
mean, everybody's laughing. I mean, you guys, I mean, this is PCC. You guys, I mean, if you're not into astrology, come on.
But so that's the timing. The time is right. I mean, whether it's astrologically right or whether it's right in the history of the world, in whatever way you want to say that it's right, this is a really important point. The time is right to do something with these. Please.
I just want to add a voice to the Ebola issue.
Yeah.
I think there is something that the world needs to know. That's I'm from Ghana, which is closer to from West Africa, and I know the terrain very well with Sierra Leone and then Guinea.
Yeah.
In fact, the Ebola really began from Guinea.
Okay.
And the term called Ebola is the name of a river.
Yeah.
And then they named the river after the virus because when they went for research to really find out the village where the outbreak started, the nearest river to that village was called Ebola. So where they discovered this virus, then they now name it after that river because there was a connection. What we need to know is that if you destroy the natural habitat in Amazon, and then you destroy that of West Africa, it means the poles, the two major shock absorbers of the Western world, is already been paralyzed. That is what the world doesn't know. And that is what is really happening. So given the situation in West Africa, it may interest you to know that Sierra Leone, for instance, had already gone through war. situation. And the kind of poisonous substance that have been poured there really makes it difficult for even the living organisms to even not only live, but even to eat whatever what will be harmful to humanity, because there are some organisms there that really eat all this virus up. There are insects that take care of all this. Nature has a way of catering for this. So when you send all this poisonous substance in the name of mining, then it means you have already cut out your own way of cutting out. Then you, humanity, have to face it. And then the byproduct of the war is that it had left the people basically hungry. So it is a common phenomenon that you go to farm and then you find you found a mango, and then the bears or any animal might have shared the part, and then you also take the part. And I'm a victim of it, and that's how I grew up. I go to the wilds, and then that's where we eat whatever we share with the animals. And then here is the case that times have changed and the situation in that region have changed. So all these animals and insects that are now coming, they are all infected with all kinds of viruses that humanity cannot contain. And because of the symbiotic relationship between the human beings and animals there, once you destroy the environment, then the codependency kind of link has been broken, and that becomes the major base of the situation. Last week, my closest friend died out of Ebola. I have lost more than 20 close friends that I studied in the seminary with, who are my young priests as my age. And that will tell you, and one of them sent me an email that the seriousness of the Ebola is that once you get it, it is the only virus that can eat every part of you except your bone. And it takes just 48 hours. Within 48 hours, your system is completely shut. It's like acid. Once it touches you, your body is really corroded. Now before you know, you are gone. So it is as serious as that. But I don't think they have really given us, the Western world, the true picture of the situation. Now, I managed to get some 2 couples out from Sierra Leone to come over 6 months ago. And then where they were working, there what even made me force them to leave the country was because you can go to a community and then the whole family, you have about 20 people there. Because you can have 10 people sharing a small room, 20 people sharing a little place. So, and it is just by mere physical contact, then you get it. So it is not a respiratory issue, it's just a contact. And you can't see a brother sweating and you can't offer him a cup of water. And by the time you give it the cup of water, you have forgotten it. And before you know, you can have about 20 deaths in the family on a day. And nobody is even burying them because people are running away. So this is as serious as that. And it's all because, as you rightly pointed out, the natural habitat they are destroying for gold mining, bauxite, magnesium. And the question is, who are taking them and who are those behind? So the Western world stage this drama and they pretend not to see the reality because it is feeding them. And at the end of the day, now the Ebola is spreading. And now once it has been exported to US, then we get to know that the world is really a global village, and we are all sharing it.
Exactly.
So it is a high time we really have to rise up to really know that indeed it is a wake-up call for me, for the world to know that, like karma, if you throw a ball against a wall, it bounces back to you. So now the amount of money that is going to be spent into curing Ebola is basically going to be all the money Western world have already gotten from the mining, from the gold they started from the people. So at the end of the day, it becomes a vicious cycle. So it is as serious as that, and for me it is a pure ecological issue.
Thank you so much for that. I'm so sorry about your friends. It's really stunning. And I think that my original point was like the difficulty paying attention. The Western world did not pay attention and has not. And has said, oh, we can't destroy rainforest, and then we just do it, and we poison the land from mining. And all these resources are being extracted from Africa and also from the Amazon to feed Western Europe and North America.
I was gonna say, what interests are behind the mining? What companies are driving that?
I don't know the news offhand, but it's easy enough to find out.
Right, yeah, we'll
Yeah.
try to find out.
Yeah.
I just wanted to offer one more story about this awareness thing, which was I used to live down in New Orleans and I worked with Gulf restoration, and which has all kinds of interesting implications, but the most dramatic one, because I just went down to visit last weekend, is that, I mean, the way the Gulf works is the river used to carry sediment down it that replenished the land every season, and so it basically was staying pretty level. And people moved down there, and then in the name of big shipping and the oil companies, they levied off the entire Mississippi, way out actually into the ocean, past where all the wetlands are. And so essentially it stopped the resedimentation of the land. And so now you have people who are living in a city that's sinking because of, I guess, our economy, right? They decided to wall off the river and drown themselves, but people there still aren't really even aware of that fact. They're just kind of sitting there sinking and like expanding the port, if anything, right, to get the oil.
Because
so
that's
it's
what
kinda
we're told,
interesting,
like we need to stimulate the economy in order to then have some sort of trickle down to benefit everybody.
Yeah.
But I wanna add
Anyway, but
a
yeah.
point
Just
to,
an add up, like, I don't know if you're aware of what happened about 3 weeks ago in Nigeria, where they extract most of the oil. And the very community where they get almost all the oil, if you really go to the community, you really wonder whether this is where they are getting the oil from. Gutters and everything is so filthy, the people are not taken care of. And who are the people who rise up to challenge the situation? They were women. 3 weeks ago, a group of women came together and they seized Chevron. It is a company Chevron. They were able to seize all the Chevron tankers and their pipes and made a demonstration that they were not going to, not until the government rises up. And there was, so when you brought the issue of feminism, it was quite interesting to me.
yeah, that's super
At the end of the day, the government and all his people are living big. They bring all their children here to study, they buy houses and mansions for them, they leave the poor ones to suffer, and then at the end of the day, it's bound back to the masses suffer. So it was the women in that village who had to organize themselves. They fought their own men because their men had been hired as workers, as security guards to protect them. So they fought their own men before their men even became aware that their own wives and daughters were protecting their own progeny. So when you brought this issue up, it's interesting.
Do you know where that is in Nigeria? Where it was in Nigeria? You
Yes,
said?
I'll give you the details.
Yeah, great. Yeah, if you could send it to the class, that'd be great. I wanted to build on a couple of points that you raised that I'm taking from this Benjamin Hale article. But he says the thing about Ebola is that it preys on our humanity. I mean, not only is it a horrific death, and not only is it spreading rapidly, but and you pointed to this, that the things that we do that are most human, like caring for each other, like giving someone a glass of water or bringing them a blanket or cleaning them up or whatever, those are the ways that the disease infects other people. And so he said, which I just think is so profound, he said that is the true danger, that it threatens our humanity. I mean, it threatens lives very, very seriously, but it threatens our caring capacities. And because obviously the instinct, if your family member is ill, you're gonna comfort them, you're gonna hug them, you're gonna bring them water, you're gonna bring them blankets, whatever they need. And he offers these heartbreaking examples of, if you're a parent and you're ill and your child wants to come to you for a cuddle, are you gonna say, stay away to your little child? Or if your child is ill and you think it's Ebola, are you not going to comfort them or care for them? Or your brother or sister, any family member. So and the other thing that he points out that you just brought up about the women taking on Chevron, which is so awesome, thank you for sharing that. He points out that Ebola is a disease of carers, and that in West Africa, most of the carers are women. And he cites a statistic that 75% of the fatalities have been women. I didn't track that down. But, so that's pretty alarming too, if the capacity for caring and taking care of others is being really threatened by this disease. So then you kind of say, oh my God, okay, so what do we do? And not like I'm gonna offer any quick answer by any means, but Hale says, like, we have to overwhelm this disease with caring. So part of the reason I even brought it up, and I'm so glad that you shared so much more information, is that we have to know and we have to care, and we have to not be distracted and not turn away. Like, even though these people are far away, and even though maybe they don't look like us or we've never met them, like, they're part of the global village, and we have to care about them, and our futures are tied up through this mining and through this biodiversity loss. And he says we have to overwhelm this disease with caring. And so we have to send money to whatever organization we trust. We have to share information about it, and also try to overcome some of the misinformation or superstitions about it, which is flying around wildly. Thank you, Fox News. You know, but try to get the concrete information and be able to share that. And so that's really, I mean, here we are in an institution of higher education. We try to learn, we try to seek knowledge and pass it on. And so that's why I bring it up, but then also this issue of karma. I mean, we see our futures all tied together, and West Africa is not really separate. We have a West African in the classroom with us, and we're not separate, and our maybe our jewelry or our cell phones or whatever are originating from minerals.
Well, it actually made it to the United States.
Well,
it's
and,
in the
and
United
that,
States. That's a big deal. Texas
it's
and
a huge
where
deal.
else?
It's a huge deal.
It never
and
was
yet
before.
I don't want to privilege that, because that's when the U.S. started paying attention. And,
Well, it's a fact.
but yes, it's right. And so
I mean,
it's
why
here.
keep it from us?
Yeah, no, not keeping it from you by any means, but to me that's a bit less important. But absolutely, it's here.
Well, I
and we
mean,
have
it
to
shows
deal
how
with it.
serious it is. I mean,
Yeah.
that it's.
Yeah, and there's no, in an age of global travel and global village, there's no way to not have it here and in Western Europe and lots of other places.
No,
Robert.
Brian, you know the Eric Duncan who got that sickness, who brought the sickness here.
Yeah.
He traveled home to Liberia, and his next door neighbor's daughter was sick
Yeah.
of Ebola. And what was Eric's problem? His problem was that he couldn't see the suffering girl and live, so he took the girl to hospital. That was all his mistake he made. And yesterday, my colleague in Florida, Francis Sibo, a reverend brother, yesterday he lost 9 of his brothers and sisters in his own compound. He called me, I was crying on the phone. You know, so just because of reaching out, and I'm happy, who are the caregivers back home in West Africa? They are mothers, they are the women. And then even the traditional herbs they could boil to help people. Where are the trees?
Right.
You know, they are no more in existence. So how do we cater for the situation? And now, how many people fly from West Africa to Heathrow in a day? Thousands of people. You can't stop it, because that is where they get their money. All the people flying from all the airplanes and co, the greater chunk of money they got is from the developing countries. They get most of them from the West Africa. If you stop all the airlines coming from West Africa, Heathrow will collapse. Many of these plane situations will collapse. So there are hard and concrete facts regarding, but because it has not really hit us in our own neighborhood here, we don't seem to get the picture. But it is a karma. I'm very happy you brought it. It is dancing around. So it is a hard time. We have to wake up to draw the attention. Other than that, before we know, we are the people going to suffer the whole mess.
Robert?
We're running out of time, but just
Yeah.
very, very quickly, this thing about karma. Ordinary people can make a mistake, and it's sort of bad. But at the point of the Greek tragedies and Shakespeare's tragedies, So when a king doesn't pay attention, it brings down the kingdom. And so there are people in king positions that senators, governors, CDC, etc., who weren't paying attention. And it's not just that the children get Ebola, but in a certain sense, it threatens the kingdom.
Yeah.
So it's so complicated because it doesn't just hit Lear or Oedipus.
Yeah,
It brings down the kingdom.
yeah. And that's why I think it's a tragedy in the
I think
literary
it's a great,
sense.
great point to make about it being a tragedy.
Yeah.
But if you're going, you should go.
Yeah, okay.
It was a wonderful class, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. And say hello to Bill for all of us.
I sure will.
Tell him we're doing great work
I will.
and that we're on his team.
For
We
sure.
assume he's on ours.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to go. It's
Yeah,
really
sure.
special. Really appreciate it.
My far-sighted wife bought the tickets.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
What a lovely, fortunate evening to get
Yeah.
to spend the evening with Ellen also.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Great.